Okay, thank you for joining us tonight for Art and Music as Resistance. I'm Tate Baeza, Director of Exhibitions at the National Center for Civil and Human Rights. This program is part of the Center's campaign for equal dignity, our campaign exploring systemic racial and economic injustices, providing resources and educational programming, and amplifying the work of advocates. There are many actions you can take to get involved, including participating in our online Art for Equal Dignity social media activation. Go to equaldignity.org to learn all about the ways to get involved. Tonight's discussion is in partnership with ARTiculate Atlanta, an annual art social, including visual art of every media and contemporary music. This year's ARTiculate event will take place virtually tomorrow, August 1st at 7 p.m. You can register at www.articulateatl.org. Again, that's www.articulateatl.org. The organization provides opportunities to young teens who have a lot of talent but limited access to art opportunities. Support the organization tomorrow, again at 7 p.m. This city has been a hub for inspiration and a destination for visual and performance artists for decades. From Outkast to Migos, the city's soundtrack has penetrated every region of the country and influenced the world. Atlanta's sound is the sound of cool. Abroad, the snares and hi-hats of Southern hip hop have become the standard. Like it or not, trap is the city's biggest cultural export and the civil rights movement, its most impactful historical legacy. With that, this city naturally rests at the intersection of creative expression and political action. The city celebrates the ratchet and revolutionary simultaneously and makes no apologies for either. Today, I'm pleased to be in dialogue with 3 Atlanta-based artists and cultural producers to further unpack the intersections of art and activism. Welcome. To introduce our panelists, I'm gonna start with Alex Christopher Williams, a photographer and curator based in Atlanta. Williams runs Minor League, an online contemporary art magazine and resource. His work explores race, identity, and history, and can be found in the collections of the High Museum of Art and the Savannah College of Art and Design. He will be included in an upcoming exhibition at Silver Eye, Pittsburgh, and has exhibited work at institutions and museums in New Orleans, Louisiana, and Greensboro, Alabama. His work has been featured in publications such as Oxford American, Photo Emphasis, Juxtapose Magazine, and The Daily Beast, among others. Thank you so much for joining us today, Alex. Next we have Jason Orr, an award-winning documentary filmmaker and cultural producer, noted for creating FunkJazz Kafé Arts and Music Festival and Live Arts Documentary Film Festival and Music Conference. Among other things, Orr produced the award-winning documentary Maynard about former Atlanta Mayor Maynard Jackson, and has appeared on television series Unsung and Leading Ladies. He is Director of Operations at Wolf Creek Amphitheater in the city of South Fulton, Georgia. Welcome, Jason Orr.
Hey. Hello.
And we have with us Shanequa Gay, an Atlanta native painter, activist, designer, and poet. Gay was chosen by the Congressional Club to illustrate the hostess gift at the First Lady's Luncheon for Michelle Obama. She was one of 10 visual artists selected for Off the Wall, a citywide mural initiative launched for Super Bowl 53 in Atlanta. Her work has been featured in films like Addicted and in television shows such as Being Mary Jane, Zoe Ever After, and Greenleaf. She's exhibited at institutions such as Hammond's House Museum, Chastain Art Center, and Hudgens Center for the Arts, and has been collected by the Auburn Avenue Research Library, Savannah College of Art and Design, among other national and international institutions. Welcome, Shanequa. Okay, so for my first question, I'm going to start with you, Shanequa.
No.
Yes, very yes. Your site-specific installation and exhibition at Hammond's House Museum called Lit Without Sherman was powerful and unapologetic love letter to the historic West End neighborhood. And it was a response to gentrification in the area. There were also oral histories delivered in video components that were in one of the galleries for that exhibition, where people who are of or influenced by the West End gave testimonies. Can you tell us a little bit about your motivations for that exhibition and how you, both through what you ultimately produced, but also through the process of creating the work for the show, responded to Atlanta's changing demographic landscape?
Sure. So I thought it was important for the community to have authorship in a space where that is changing greatly. My grandmother actually lived like 3-5 minutes up the street from Hammond's House Museum, so it was not a foreign place for me. It was a place I used to kind of go to as a kid, and I thought it would be essential, not just myself, along with Leatrice and Ravi Wyndham. We just wanted to kind of speak about how beautiful the West End is. Like, it's just an amazing cultural space of Black people, and, you know, kind of delving into the erasure of that, and wanting to speak to the HBCUs that are housed over there. Kind of when you Google, you don't have a good frame of mind that that's actually where the HBCUs are. A lot of people don't know that W.E.B. Du Bois was actually over at Clark Atlanta, and he wrote The Souls of Black Folks over there. And so, right, we just have like all this beautiful language. I did a lot of canvassing, speaking to the people that actually lived there, as well as speaking to historians such as Kevin Sipp, who was a former curator there. So it wasn't just a kind of I speak for us thought process, but that the community as a whole spoke. You know, there were representations of Hebrew Israelites, you know, the Muslim brothers that sell bean pies, the water boys, who are currently kind of what I feel like are trying to be erased in the city of Atlanta. I'm not for that. I'm for self-employment, which is what those young brothers are doing. And so, yeah, I just felt like it was really important to take up space. And they gave me the opportunity to do that at the Hammond's House in several rooms, about 4 or 5 rooms. I got to take up a lot of space. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was so, I saw that show. I actually went twice because I wanted to see it again. It was such a great moment to gift the community with itself.
That's right.
Having the water boys in there was very powerful. For people who don't know, in the West End, at every major intersection, there are young boys selling water to make money. And Shanequa did an installation that was an image of them. And I just thought that was wonderful. And next I'm gonna go to you, Alex. Minor League is a curatorial project and artist resource anchored by a website where you produce content like interviews with emerging artists and curators. And you do that with artists and curators regionally, but you have an emphasis on Atlanta. Tell us more about Minor League and its mission, and what was the impetus for it, and what is it continuing to respond to?
So Minor League started as a gallery. My partner and I started last year, called The Mast. And we wanted to create a space that was showing work that we felt that might not be getting the opportunity in Atlanta. And so with that, we were focusing on a lot of younger artists or artists who weren't necessarily at that point where they were getting to show at some of the galleries in town. And so after that space ended, we moved on to wanting to be able to create content somehow, because we didn't have a physical space anymore. And so we moved on to doing interviews. And that same mission applied, where I was really focused on trying to be an advocate for artists of the South, because I feel like there's a lot of tropes that come along with being, or with making art in the South. And so trying to be, you know, kind of a capsule that brings all of these different people together was kind of the focus for that. So we're still putting on shows in the age of coronavirus. It's kind of difficult to say what the future of that is. But the focus has always been to try and create a diverse and equitable program that is, showing the best artists that, are to be found, but also thinking about representation and what kind of stories what we're telling.
Thank you. And Jason, you are the founder and director of the legendary FunkJazz Kafé, which is credited with establishing a model for niche festivals full of emerging artists, the legacy of which can be found in relatively newer festivals like Punk and certainly in Atlanta's ARTiculate. First, for some watching who may not be as familiar with FunkJazz Kafé, please briefly describe it. And as you do so, tell us why it was important to you to create an event that provided a space for unheard or newer talent, as opposed to building a festival primarily consisting of visual and performance artists that are established.
A few questions in there. Well, to start, FunkJazz Kafé Arts and Music Festival was my attempt at activism, because there was a large group of people in the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s. And we're talking about a program that went 25 years, right? But at that time, there wasn't a focus on just pure creative, soulful, artistic expression. It was all driven towards, if you were hip hop or whatever the mainstream wanted, right? So I wanted to create something that was anti-status quo. Eventually it became that, actually, anti-status quo, anti-mainstream, for that majority of society that was neglected and overlooked and not marketed to. And you had my ambitions to create a new standard in artistic expression, artistic understanding and innovation, as well as a new model for experiential events and live performance through all artistic disciplines. For the last 25 years, like FunkJazz Kafé represented and maintained a policy of cultural preservation, cultural education, cultural sustainability, and cultural innovation, So if that's brief, there's more, but yeah. Thanks
for that. Yeah, you created basically like another avenue during a time where record companies had so much power. I feel like we've gotten a little bit away from that now with the internet and all these things like Bandcamp and SoundCloud. But for a while there, the record companies controlled everything. And experiences like FunkJazz Kafé gave people who were incredibly talented a place to be showcased, where they'd been blocked by the exceeding power of those kinds of record companies at the time.
It's like trying to make Bill Withers do something other than what he does. You know what I'm saying? That's what was happening. You had people like India Ari, you had Dion Ferris, you had Michelle and Cello, you had Lauryn Hill that was coming out of Fugees, Erykah Badu hadn't come yet, or Jill Scott was coming, but all of these new artists with new expression, which was the evolution of Black soulful expression, D'Angelo, they needed a platform. And at that time, all doors were closed. It was almost, if you were Black, you ain't getting the chance. You know what I'm saying? The same thing happened in R&B, when you had all the funk bands, Cameo, Brick Slave, Confunction, but then they want you to, be more of like Celine Dion, hence Whitney Houston, Luther Vandross. Hell, Freddie Jackson was damn near trying to be a crossover. The thing back then was to cross over, you know what I'm saying? Cross over into what? Into their field, into their zone, into their stuff, So I was trying to create stuff that was our stuff, unashamedly and unapologetically. It's just us. It's what we do. So
and you pulled that off.
Thank you.
I want to stick with you for just a second. So for those watching that aren't familiar, again, FunkJazz was famous for not releasing the lineup ahead of time. You didn't really know what you were going to get. But people came and packed the house anyway, which demonstrated to me two things. One, that the aim was really never to have a quote unquote music festival, although for, as you said to me once before, Jason, for licensing purposes, it was categorized as a festival. It really wasn't about that the way that other festivals are. It was about creating an experience. People were buying into an atmosphere. It wasn't about, it didn't matter, secondarily, you know, the music and the artists that were on display. It was really about how you felt there. You were trading, Jason, in an experience. And people absolutely, my second point, trusted you to do that. They trusted that to be delivered every time, regardless of who specifically was going to be there. With this in mind, some years ago, I heard you describe FunkJazz Kafé, and you kind of talked about this a little bit, but you use I want to be specific and use the phrase you use. You talked about it as an exercise in cultural preservation. And since then, you've also spoken at universities, as I understand it, about social history and cultural preservation further. In what ways does an art and music festival have the potential to facilitate cultural preservation?
Quite easily, just show the history, show what was great. You know, Little Richard just passed, right? And when I tell people, especially younger folks, I'm like, that's a cold MF. That was a bad dude, you know? And they're like, why? I was like, number one, he was a black man that was straight out gay, not hiding, right? And then he was doing a music that was unapologetic. It turned out to be rock and roll. You know what I mean? To say tutti frutti, good booty. You know, that's crazy, you know, but he did it, you know, and, you know, I'm sure each of you on here have some dope friends, right? So I had some dope friends that I knew would have to have their time. They were in their early 20s, some in their teens, some in their 30s. And they weren't just singers. You know, here in Atlanta, I mean, there are books written about the cultural arts scenes in Atlanta, going all the way back to Ray Charles and Little Richard and James Brown and Otis Redding and Bohannon and all those guys. Hence then comes Slave, Cameo, Brick, and then Outkast and T.I. and Bone and to Migos, you know what I'm saying? To Lil Yachty, everybody, Lil Baby, you know what I'm saying? But I had friends that were not just performance artists, they were photographers like Alex, they were, you know, visual artists like Maurice Evans, you know what I'm saying? They did pottery work, they did metal sculptures, they did pattern making for fashion, you know what I mean? They were into technology. I had dudes back then that would put something to their brain and it would write music, you know what I'm saying? Back then, you know, I just wanted to highlight the excellence that we were actually doing. And I could project that in the future, y'all gonna be coming to us. I'm a smack talker like that. Like, oh, you're gonna come back to me. If we're good, you're gonna come back. Ain't that right, Alex? If you take a good picture, you're gonna come ask for it, right?
That's right.
Right. So it's like, you know, I was pretty sure about that and was very right about it, you know. And then it goes on, you know, a quarter of a century, you know. One thing about Black folks, if you don't go 5 years, 3 years, 8 years, being mediocre. It just don't. You have to show them something, or people in general, that this is you, this is where you come from, so you want to preserve this. You know what I mean? You don't want to throw it away. You don't want to say, oh man, you old school, man. Well, I don't want to hear nothing about no Little Richard, no Cameo, you know, and then, well, you turn around and show them some samples and say, well, you know, socially, Little Richard was bad because you couldn't even be a black man. You were, you know, 3/5 of a human pretty much, you know what I'm saying? And here he is, all out flamboyant, and then he's delivering a new music. We watched James Brown in Italy in 1971 the other day, and he was delivering Sex Machine, you know, all this hard stop on the one funk. And in the middle of it, it was like, try me. And I was telling my lady, I was like, that's important. So this is the preservation part. And she was like, why? I was like, Try Me is like 1965. And this is 1971. He delivering funk. You know what I'm saying? It's like, we can't understand that because we come from tons of hip hop, tons of samples. We live that in our world. It's a part of our ether, right?
With all of the passion that you have for cultural preservation, which thank you for showing up as your full self and emoting this love you have for and for music as a cultural legacy of the African American experience. But it's, as you spoke, it occurred to me that it is a natural progression for you to become a documentary filmmaker, right? Like, because from cultural preservation to like actually creating like a canon that people can refer to later.
You capture it.
I want to go to you, Alex, and talk about ethics in photography.
Sure.
Although photography, like all forms of expression, is subjective, reflecting the photographer and the questions they aim to pose and the stories they set out to tell, the medium nevertheless has a particularly close relationship to documentation. Photography is often interpreted as evidence. In the United States, this has been useful in campaigns to spread awareness of lynching and anti-Black violence in the American South, from images of the lynching of Jesse Washington to images of Emmett Till and beyond. It has effectively galvanized people in all regions to engage in direct action campaigns against anti-Black violence and segregation. Previously, you and I spoke about a code of ethics among photographers and some of the intended and importantly unintended consequences of documentation, particularly in the midst of these international protests that we're experiencing. Could you tell us a little bit about sort of the ethics of that and what are some of the concerns for photographers and your thoughts on the responsibilities of photographers who are working in the field?
Yeah, I mean, that's an important question. You know, ethics or a code of conduct of how you are supposed to, you know, act on the street while you're making pictures during a protest is a big topic. But I think we should start by stating or really further emphasizing what you said about how important photography was to the Civil Rights Act. It was passed in the 1960s. It was the photographs or the evidence, as you stated, that, you know, showed the rest of white America what was going on in the South. And so as we get to, you know, the protests and the movement that we're in currently, there's a lot of talk on the Twitter sphere or the Instagram about, you know, what the role of a photographer is to be, or what the role of photography documenting these protests is to be, or to be remembered. And I think it's really important to emphasize how important it is as a medium, but there's definitely conversations or questions about maybe some of the more problematic sides of what photography can offer, and maybe identifying folks who are in the moment and doing acts that could further get them in trouble. And so there's a conversation culturally about how we want to participate with photography, if we should, ban or chastise all people who are making pictures at the protests. You know, that's a tricky question, because for me, we wouldn't be living in the world that we were or are in if we didn't have photographers out on the street, risking, themselves along with the marchers and the foot soldiers to make sure that their protests and their voices were heard.
Yeah, it's tricky because, in a way, photographers and film crews, to your point about history, they provide oversight and they provide a record of social and political action for the annals of history. But then what happens if your photography as photographers is subpoenaed for for a case against a protester or someone? It's tricky. And so I guess I'm glad that photographers are having these conversations about what kind of sort of code of ethics needs to be further developed, should you be there or not. I think for most people, the inclination is that you should. We want to see what you got, you know, we want to see what we weren't there for. And it's very important to bear witness. But when you have things like the police or the judicial system, you know, taking people's cameras to use in cases against people, or forcing you to submit your film roll or your digital film, then it gets really tricky. So thank you for at least, even though there's no clear answer, for engaging it, thinking critically about it.
Yeah, yeah.
And then I have so many questions I could ask each of you, but unfortunately the time is just zipping by, and I'm gonna only be able to ask one more before we hear from everyone at home who I'm sure has lots of questions to ask you, and we're gonna invite them in to participate in this conversation with us. And my last question is for you, Shanequa. Recently you did a Creative Mornings talk, and you gave a very personal account of some of the hardships you endured and witnessed in your childhood. And you used this phrase describing that you would go into your room and make art to, quote, create yourself into a place of okay. And I just loved that phrasing. You discussed the notion of purpose, from our DNA coding to the value of living deliberately. And so in this way, you speak to the ways we are both sort of preconditioned or naturally gifted, but you also speak to the choices we make. And some of the things you're saying, I understood to be what other people mean when they say things like living in your truth. My first question to you about this is in response to sort of this prevailing notion that activism is in service to others. It's something you do for others. Tell us how activism is also being in service to yourself. What are some of your takes on the value of radical self-care and its role in the greater dialogue around social change?
Sure. So one thing, I am a two-term AmeriCorps member, right? So I have a background in service. And one of the things that we learned in service to the communities was being in service to others was a way of being in service to yourself, right? It is creating community. It is when we help others that you're actually helping yourself. You know, one of the ways they say to come out of depression is to help somebody else, right? Because it removes you away from your ego. Because we're in a society that is very self-centered, very egocentric, very all about me. By and large, you know, from a colonial perspective, ego is not African. It's just not. Like, worrying about yourself is not an African thought process. And so the goal is to have more concern toward what's going on with my community, what's going on with other people, because that also makes me whole, right? And so radical self-care in COVID right now is just staying away from people, right? or being mindful of who you are around. Radical self-care for me today was going to get some running shoes, because my running shoes are busted, and because my butt done got fat, and and being like in the kitchen actively 5-10 times a day. So I went and got some running shoes so I can get myself back out here and run. Radical self-care for me is spending a lot of time with my family. You know, my son is here from school, back from North Carolina Central University. And it's hard for him to be back, but I'm so happy to have him back because he's safe. I know where he is. You know what I mean? Like, during this time, it's really important to know where people are, where your family is right now. And so it feels good to feed him, to worry and bother him. So for me, that is a part of, you know, just being a mother and a nurturer. That's a part of self-care for me. And it's just finding a place of being at peace. I have been on go probably for the past 2 or 3 years. And so this time of being able to rest on purpose take care of myself on purpose, and really be able to sit down and focus on me and be grounded with me. Probably from the things I try to run and escape from, the thoughts you don't want to hear, which is why you stay busy. I really had time to kind of focus and deal on that. So for me, those are some play-by-plays of self-care.
Thank you for sharing. And if we don't take care of ourselves, then we're not really as well equipped to take on the world or the work we want to do in service of others. I want to, I see we don't have questions yet, so I'm going to go ahead and ask a couple more of the questions I've prepared for you guys. I'm so excited. But I certainly hope that people start to send in some questions as well. If you're watching and you have a question from one of our panelists, please send them our way. I'm going to stick with you for a second, Shanequa, and ask you a question about your work. Your figurative work prominently features Black women, including paintings of Black women that you call devouts. You've spoken about devouts characters in your paintings as, through ritual or otherwise, serving as like people who intercede on behalf of those without a voice. Tell us more about the devouts. What are they, and what inspired them?
You know, we had a stint about 400 years where Black imagination was kind of robbed or stale for a little while. And so it's me imagining, because what is the Black never-ending story? What is the Black Alice in Wonderland? What is the Black Where the Wild Things Are? What is the Black Wizard in Wonderland? This is me kind of creating mythologies or new mythologies for myself. Audre Lorde speaks about creating your own myths in the here and now. It is also about reimagining deities. You know, I kind of pull from a conversation between Gloria Steinem and Bell Hooks, where Bell Hooks talked about how can Black people ever truly decolonize their minds if they cannot imagine God as themselves. And so I'm kind of creating what I would consider old world figures. So hybridity is not new. It's actually hundreds, thousands, millions of years old. And so I feel like I'm borrowing from indigenous cultures that all are thou, right? So it's not a degradation when you combine the animal and human, because if you speak and think from an indigenous mindset, you're not degrading animals. Animals are not less than human. It is because of how animals have been treated under colonization that we look at them like it's or other. And how even African Americans have been treated is why we've been looked at as it or other. And so instead of, you know, this kind of mindset that is separate, is that we're part of a Gaia principle. We're all a part of the same organism. We're all one. And so I've created these figures that are kind of created from the prayers of African American women when Jesus wasn't enough.
Thank you. And Jason, I'm glad I get to ask you this question. We'll come back to you. I want to talk to you about the future of social gatherings around art. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I know you're working on a book called Social Distancing and the Death of the Live Performance Economy. With the uncertainty of COVID and so forth, what challenges lay ahead, you know, regarding creatives connecting with their audience? Could you tell us a bit about what you're finding in your research and share your predictions about the future of live entertainment?
So I've been predicting live entertainment. That's what FunkJazz Kafé is. That goes into not announcing the talent. That goes into when you're pushing something, the direction that everybody's going, it eventually will have a end date. You know what I'm saying? Now, let me also throw this in there. I'm director of operations at Wolf Creek Amphitheater. It is a 5,800 seater amphitheater. And, you know, I get a lot of calls from promoters who feel like, you know, if a restaurant opens, then we're ready for concert season. You know what I'm saying? I believe that we're going to be social distancing for at least 5 to 10 years. You know, if anything, the fear will remain. Just like Shanequa said, you know, it's like the best way of preserving yourself is just to stay away from people. And that's going to be the mindset of a lot of people. You know what I'm saying? There are going to be other things that happen too in order for you to go outside and go into a grocery store. You know, COVID is supposedly an acronym, you know what I mean? Certificate of Vaccination Identification. You know what I'm saying? That you're going to have to prove that you have been tested. At work today, they told me I got to get tested 3 times a month. You know what I'm saying? So you're going to have a certificate or something to show that you're tested. And you see how we've conducted ourselves in this first wave, right? I mean, come on. Did we behave properly in Florida? You know, in New York and California? You know, we're going to have some issues, you know. So this is the beginning of the wave, you know, that when it comes down to, I don't even, you know, on some levels, I think even the drive-in concerts may not last. Though I like the idea. At Wolf Creek, we got 4 big lots, you know, where we can do Kenny Leon Theater. We could do a whole bunch with staging, you know, the 18-wheeler trucks come up and they open up. But, you know, there are a lot of different things in regards to, and I know we don't have time for them now. That's why I'm just skipping over them. I gave you some, you know, predictions. Like 5 to 10 years, you're going to be wearing a mask for that long. You know what I'm saying?
I kind of want to go around with everyone in case you have ideas. If you haven't had enough time to think about this, I certainly haven't. I think we're all still very much adjusting. It's only been 4 months of something that we really don't know how long, to your point, Jason, will last. But have any of you given thought to how you think like exhibitions and concerts and all manner of sharing creative expression may change? I know that, Jason, you said, you know, you think the drive-ins will work for a little while, but that you don't think they have staying power. What do we think might have staying power? I mean, we're all just guessing at this point, but I do think that this has created opportunities for innovation and things that we would have never discovered that we may end up quite liking, but we wouldn't have had to delve into trying to establish a new normal without this global public health crisis. Any thought to what things look like in the future? Are we digitizing everything? I'll start with you, Alex.
Yeah, I mean, I got thoughts on that. You know, ask your local 18-year-old how many vinyl records they got. I mean,
hey.
You know, everything goes in a circular motion, you know. So if we go to a drive-in, you know, that'll be going from a, you know, vinyl to a tape, and then we'll go to online, and then now we're on MP3s. But at some point, we'll get back in the physical space. I mean, we're humans. That's how we communicate. That's how we've been able to survive for millennia. And so, you know, everything comes back to its core function at some point.
Shanequa, have you given any thought to how you know, sharing and displaying your work may change?
I think it's probably going to be the way it currently is for a while. So one of the things that's kind of been disappointing, especially when it first started, I had like 3 mural installations up, and the only way people could see them was digitally, like online. And so even now I have about 3, 4 others coming up over the course of the fall. And, you know, they're trying to create ways to make it safe for me to come in, and then trying to figure out how they're going to display the works to people. And it's these time-based, you have to make a time ticket to go see work now, to be a part and be within the space. So I think that's going to be for a minute, that people will, you know, what's crazy is that we have chosen to sit in front of our screens for years now. We've chosen to be here, and now we're kind of forced to be here. Right? So it's a little weird, right? We've chosen our screens for like the past decade, and now when they're saying you have to use it, it's a problem. But it's almost like we've been complicit. I won't say almost, we have been complicit in this digital format. Yeah.
I mean, you one thing we got to think about is, what does the world look like after the shakeout? You know, after a lot of restaurants ain't making it right now. They're not gonna make it to a second wave, right? You know, you got bars and clubs, churches, outdoor festivals, tourism. You know, it's a lot of things that are just going to be different. Ride sharing, sporting events, amusement parks, you know what I'm saying? Just open mics, you know, and what does, and this is what I like about what this is today, because you have artists talking about it, right? And we are capable of taking a turntable and doing something other than playing records on it. Damn near making $1 billion industry, right? From scratch and doing other things. It wasn't made for that, but we turned it into out of necessity. You know what I mean? Hip hop was that. And so we're going to be in a crash period where we're not doing ride sharing. Your 13-year-old ain't doing soccer. You know what I'm saying? Because you don't want them around other kids. You don't want them around other people. School is going through an issue, you know, schooling, you know, and that's not saying homeschooling is good, but everybody might not be able to do it. You know what I'm saying? Where you have to sit there and pay attention. There's just so many things. After the shakedown, what will the environment be like?
Yeah, but people, like, you made a great point. I felt like when you were talking about scratching records and taking old records and cutting them up and sampling to make something new, I think that there was a note of optimism in there for me, where I was reminded that very frequently people have found a way to make new innovations, and it may seem, you know, insurmountably difficult now, but I think that we will probably arrive at a place where we've remixed it the way that
What will that be, though? What do you think that'll be?
I don't know, but I have a couple of questions from our audience. I want this to be your platform. And so I'm going to read the first one before we wrap up. Man, this went by fast. The first one's for you, Alex. I'm a lifelong photographer and native Atlantan. I grab my camera whenever there's an event that speaks to social justice issues, like the Martin Luther King Jr. Day Parade, etc. I use them on social media, but how do you suggest getting them out there more for the public to see and benefit from on a larger scale? Documentary journalistic photography is my passion and preferred genre, but hard to know how to break into. So I guess this person's talking about how do you break into that very specific type of photography where it might be different from other types of photographic work.
Yeah, sure. So this is a good question. I think it's the core question that almost all artists think about, especially in the age of social media. You could be a wonderfully fantastic and talented, authentic being of an artist and have no viral capability on social media. And, you know, you will judge your self-worth or the validity of your work based off of, you know, who you think is seeing your work or not. And it's a core issue. But I would say this: photography is a language. That's how you have to think about it. It's a language just like French and English and any other language in the world, where if you don't have a group of people who you are participating with to refine that language, then it just becomes mumbled and gargled. So if you're out, you know, covering, you know, events, walk up to another photographer and, you know, talk about how silly their shoestrings are, you know, make friends out there on the street, and create a cohort of people who are interested in the same things as you are. You know, community is the most important thing for any artist in any space. It's the reason why I created Minor League, because, you know, we need a space to congregate. And so if you're not out there, you know, introducing yourself to other people and creating with other people, then yeah, it can feel like you're just shouting out to the ethos. So that would be my first suggestion.
I'm seeing we have time for like one more question, and someone wrote in the perfect question to close on that I'll put to each of you. You're being asked, panelists, to respond to a Nina Simone quote, that it's the artist's duty to reflect the times in which we live. What are your thoughts on that quote? I'll start with you, Shanequa.
The reason we understand our history, the reason we kind of get what was happening before is because of the artists. is because the artist reflected the time and reflected the day. So I think as, you know, while Nina is very eloquent, by and large, that's a given. It is our duty. It's what we do. It's what we've been created for, to reflect the times. So, you know, the way that Alex documents and the way that Jason cultivates their culture, like cultural experiences, they're documenting, they're keepers, they're doing their duty for the times. And so, yeah. The end.
Jason?
Jason? Alex?
Yeah, I mean, I'll respond next. I think, you know, from my perspective, there are artists who make work about what's going on in the world right now, and then there are artists who don't. And without, you know, throwing any shade, I'm just not so much interested in the folks who are so caught up in the fundamentals or the color or all that. I want to see something that's going to change people's mind, that's going to give new perspective, that work that has something at stake, that you're offering up something, a part of yourself to contribute to your community, to your society, to the history of whatever medium that you're a part of. So I think it's a given that's, you know, what makes quality work.
Thank you.
I agree with both Shanequa and Alex. If anybody's seen this movie, FunkJazz Kafé, Diary of a Decade, shameless plug for sure. I don't get enough credit for it anyway. I'm like Little Richard on that tip. But it starts with a statement that says you'll always know the condition of a people by what's reflected in their music, right? Which is in essence saying, we know where you are by the frequency that you're giving out artistically, right? So it is important for us to do very innovative things, against the grain, non-status quo stuff, with a turntable, with records, with, you know, machinery, you know, that don't exist. You're putting things together. And this time now, I think, you know, due to social distancing, there was a time, like, I really want to say, Shanequa, I don't think we ever met before. Have we met before? We have? I would like to say, and Alex, I'd like to come hang out with y'all. I like to, let's go out and eat on me, but we can't do that quick. You know what I'm saying? Let's get together and let's talk, and then we will come up with something. That's understood. I probably wouldn't let him leave without saying, Alex, tell me something, Shanequa, show me something. You know what I'm saying? Show me something. Let's build on top of it, you know.
Such the time where there's so much to say, right? To the Nina Simone quote. This is the time where there's a lot to say, and of course, an inclination to collaborate. It's really going to take some innovation and creativity to execute on collaboration right now. But fortunately for all of us, we are creatives. I want to thank our panelists so much for joining us tonight. And before I close out, I just want to talk about some upcoming events at the center. We have next week, in about a week, we have an event on August 7th at noon. We'll be hosting a discussion called Eviction, Crisis at the Core of Economic Instability, where we will engage the nation's eviction problem. You can go to our website, equaldignity.org, to register. We also have an event coming up on, sooner than that, on August the 5th at 7 p.m., where we will be talking about the film An American Trial, the Eric Garner story, with the film's director. And again, that's Wednesday the 5th at 7 p.m. And the conversation about the eviction crisis will be on August the 7th at noon. And don't forget, everyone watching, to check out ARTiculate ATL.org to register and enjoy tomorrow's event.
Yo, and follow me on Instagram, y'all.
Me too.
My Instagram has been hacked, so it's almost non-existent right now. So
I was looking for you the other day. I couldn't find you.
Yeah, I've been hacked. They got me. But thank you to George and Asohe of ARTiculate for inviting me to be a part. And we are 140 days in, and Breonna Taylor's murderers have yet to be arrested. So don't forget that.
No, rest in peace.
Thank you so much, wonderful panelists. And thank you to everyone watching. Have a wonderful evening.